The Unitarian Universalist Association will actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. And then this particular value, transformation, we adapt to the changing world. And could you read this last bit with me? We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Amen. 3 weeks ago in the racial justice service, Ira Mendelsberg mentioned how linguist John McWhorter encouraged us to see non-standard English as natural, valuable, and worthy of respect. Ira explored how his own attitudes toward language, especially dialects and vernaculars associated with marginalized groups, have shifted, and how this change is central to anti-racist work. I listened to Ira's message a week after attending my 60th high school reunion at McDonough, a semi-military school outside Baltimore. My father had graduated in 1938, and he thought the military discipline would be good for me. There's a long story there. And I think I'm here today talking on Memorial Day in dialogue with my father, who died in 1974. Since I graduated in 1965, the military aspect is gone and it's now co-ed. The school's website declares the McDonough Character Compass, the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the Life-Ready Academic Plan guide current students to become resilient, lifelong learners of strong character. The school is named for John McDonough, who was born in Baltimore but lived most of his adult life in New Orleans as a businessman, plantation owner, sometime politician, and supporter of the American Colonization Society. His estate, which provided for the creation of McDonough School, was built through the use, as you may imagine, of slave labor. This acknowledgement of the source of the funds that established my school only happened 4 years ago. Some of my classmates are upset that this story and the installation of a memorial to those enslaved and freed seems to diminish the McDonough name. One of my roommates from my junior year, who had a career in the military and served as a tank commander in the First Gulf War, was particularly offended. I listened to his perspective and tried to understand his views in light of the political conflicts that are raging in this country today. Today, I want to talk about how my mind is being changed by a heterodox Black academic, Musa al-Gharbi, and his book, We Have Never Been Woke: The Cultural Contradictions of a New Elite. On this Memorial Day weekend, as I continue trying to bridge the divides with my father and with my roommate, my message is directed as much to myself as it is to any of you. I come with 3 imperatives: remember, revise, respond. And to provide some space between the imperatives, Ron Levy is going to be offering us some Beethoven. I'll invite you to begin with the theme and variations 1 and 2. So my first imperative, remember. I invite us to remember the short life of Army Specialist Christian M. Adams. And here we have a picture of Christian Adams. Although more than 1.2 million active duty members serve in the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Space Force, they make up less than 0.4% of our population. Most of us are disconnected from their world. Christian Michael Adams was born November 4th, 1983, in the base hospital at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Donna Adams and Anthony Ray Everett. He was born into a military family that went back generations. His maternal grandfather fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. His father helped coordinate NATO operations during Operation Desert Storm. His mother and stepdad were both in the Army too, alongside many siblings and cousins. He was raised in Arizona in the community surrounding the U.S. Army Intelligence Center at Fort Huachuca, adjacent to the town of Sierra Vista. Christian received his early education in the Sierra Vista Unified School District. He was an altar server at the Fort Huachuca Main Post Chapel and participated in youth activities at several area churches. He remained religious throughout his life. He enlisted in the Army in June 2003, shortly after graduating high school, and deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom from March 2004 to March 2005 as a mechanic repairing track vehicles. He left the military in 2006, then re-enlisted in 2008, assigned to the 20th Engineer Battalion of the 36th Engineer Brigade, Fort Hood, Texas. He was sent to Afghanistan in March 2010 with Operation Enduring Freedom. He died at age 26 in Kandahar, Afghanistan, on Friday, June 11, 2010, from injuries in a non-combat related incident. His family traveled to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware to be there when his body was returned to the United States. The ceremony, during which fellow soldiers carried the casket off the plane, was simple and dignified. Specialist Adams' military awards and decorations include the National Defense Service Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, NATO Medal, Overseas Service Ribbon, and an Army Service Ribbon. Christian is survived by his wife Amanda, his daughter Faith Marie of Fort Hood, Texas, as well as his mother, Donna Adams, dad, John Roberts, and twin brother Anthony Adams of Sierra Vista, Arizona. His father, Anthony Ray Everett, and sister Sheena Everett reside in Fairfax, Virginia. He also has a brother and sister, John and Catherine Roberts, in Texas. In addition to these, he is survived by a host of other friends and relatives who share in this loss. He was preceded in death by his infant son, Jordan Isaac Adams, in 2007. A funeral mass with full military honors was held at the Main Post Chapel at Fort Huachuca. There was a procession to escort Christian's body from Halfield Funeral Home to Fort Huachuca by the Patriot Guard Riders motorcycle group. Interment was held later with a memorial service for the fallen soldiers of his unit when they returned from Afghanistan. In lieu of flowers, the family requested that memorial donations be made to the Fisher House organization that supports military families in their time of need. His stepfather commented, "He was a strong-willed person," adding that he was a religious man who loved his family and the military. A buddy who served with him in Iraq said he was a really cool guy and had a lot of good and funny memories. Please know he was a great soldier. He will never be forgotten. Till Valhalla, my brother. His obituary added, Christian was a passionate and loving person who strove to unite his family and live up to the ideals of God and country. He was a magnetic personality who will be remembered for his boisterous laughter, tall tales and bold aesthetic sensibilities. He was loved and will be missed by a diverse cadre of friends, family in the coming days. He is, in accordance with his wishes and the wishes of his family, let us celebrate his life rather than mourn his death. I shared Christian's story with my high school roommate, and he commented, "Christian was born and lived and died just as we all must." He belonged to an organization dedicated to the protection of the USA and our society. He gave his all, whether it be by accident or in combat. So on this Memorial Day weekend, as we remember this one life, may we honor all who have fallen. In listening to the details of Christian Adams' life connections, let us try to imagine the way his loss was felt across the network that his living created. As his obituary noted, Christian had a twin brother, Anthony Ray Adams, named for their father. I'll let him tell his own story. As I approached adulthood, I aspired to be a Catholic priest and prepared for that vocation through religious studies of Christian theology, scriptural exegesis, and higher criticism of the Bible. However, following a crisis of faith, I abandoned this calling. The next several years were spent wandering, managing enterprises in the private sector, and attending community college off and on. Throughout this period, I continued to explore the questions that I had been consumed with as a theologian, albeit without the religious underpinnings, through intensive private studies of philosophy and the classics. At the time, I considered myself an atheist, and I zealously tried to prove my unbelief through my lifestyle. I struggled to truly internalize atheism. Fundamentally, I was a believer. This eventual insight was the beginning of a journey which culminated with my conversion to Islam and a renewed sense of purpose. Shortly after converting to Islam, I finally completed my associate's degree at Cochise College. Then, nearly a decade after graduating high school, I applied to four-year universities. However, just as I was preparing to transfer from community college to a four-year university, I was informed that my twin brother, a soldier in the U.S. Army, had lost his life in Afghanistan. In the aftermath of this tragedy, I scrapped plans to study at New York University, where I'd been recently admitted, and enrolled in the closest land-grant public university, which also happened to have a top-notch philosophy program, so I could help support my family through this difficult time. I felt uncomfortable in the academic realm overall. I came from a military family and military community. I had years of private sector experience under my belt and continued to work while attending classes. I was a good decade older than most students. I came from a community college. I'm Black, I'm Muslim. I was and continue to be allergic to idealism, secular moralism, utopianism, and positivism. These life experiences and perspectives were alien to most in the ivory tower. Over time, my work gradually grew more political as well. Prior to my brother's death, I was disdainful towards politics. I thought politics amounted to folks getting distracted by the little things while I was focused on the big things like the structure and nature of reality or the meaning of life. However, as I worked to process the loss of my twin, I came to realize that politics was more important than I thought, and was important in different ways than I had initially understood. Resolving to help others avoid going through the tragedies like the one my own family was struggling with, I switched my concentration to applied social epistemology, with a particular focus on national security and foreign policy questions. In order to bolster my subject matter expertise, I simultaneously pursued a second degree in Near Eastern Studies. While I pursued my BAs, I also helped manage a consortium that brought together students who were military veterans with scholars from war-affected regions to study Middle East conflict together. I simultaneously served as an outreach scholar for the University of Arizona Center for Middle East Studies. Eventually, I began teaching classes on national security policy and international organizations for the Department of Government and Public Service at the University of Arizona. And then I was canceled by Fox News. Now, let me explain. In late 2014, after publishing an article arguing that the US bore significant responsibility for destabilizing the Middle East and enabling the rise of ISIS, Musa al-Gharbi became the target of Fox News, which publicly labeled him an anti-American jihadist. The resulting media campaign led to his dismissal from the University of Arizona and denial of his admission to their PhD programs despite his credentials. Musa continues, for most, a cataclysm like this would mark the end of their academic journey. It nearly did for me as well. However, as a result of providence and some life-changing advice and support from members of the University of Arizona, I managed to fail upwards and gain admission to a number of top-ranked PhD programs that I would probably never even applied to were it not for the fact that virtually all other options had been rendered non-viable by the Fox scandal. My growing concern about the pernicious effects of ideological bias and homogeneity on our ability to produce a reliable understanding of the social world led me to work with Heterodox Academy, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to understanding and addressing these very problems. Gradually, my research expanded to studying the political economy of the knowledge professions writ large, culminating in my first book, We Have Never Been Woke, The Cultural Contradictions of a New Elite, published in October 2024. And I'll say more about his book in the final section. And finally, the imperative, respond. You use collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Musa al-Gharbi's book has been working on my heart and mind ever since I learned of it and began listening to it and reading it. He had me with the concept of symbolic capitalism. As I put out in the preview for this message, symbolic capitalists are people like us Unitarian Universalists, journalists, academics, nonprofit workers, artists, lawyers, consultants, administrators, politicians, activists, and religious leaders who work primarily with words, ideas, images, and data. That's me. Or should I say, that is I. Symbolic capitalists, he said, have transformed the distribution of power and opportunity in the US and beyond. These new elites claim status and resources under the auspices of altruism and serving the common good. They claim to represent the values, interests, and priorities of the vulnerable, marginalized, and disadvantaged in society. Beneath their social justice narratives lurks a more complex and disturbing reality. Though he never names Unitarian Universalists, I think we are quintessential symbolic capitalists. Not all of us, of course, but I think most of us. For me, almost every paragraph in this book contained a self-challenging realization. That's me. Toward the conclusion, he summarized the wisdom in the massive amount of data that he wields. Perhaps we, and he uses we because he himself is a symbolic capitalist, perhaps we really do want the poor to be uplifted. We want the oppressed to be liberated. We want the marginalized to be integrated. However, we'd prefer to find a way to achieve these goals without having to sacrifice anything personally or change anything about our own lives and aspirations. Symbolic capitalists simultaneously desire to be social climbers and egalitarians. We want to mitigate inequalities while also preserving or enhancing our elite position and ensuring our children can reproduce or exceed our position. These drives are in fundamental tension. This tension has defined the symbolic professions from the outset. Both commitments are sincere. However, they do not seem to carry equal importance. Instead, the pursuit of social justice seems to be subordinate to the pursuit of affluence and influence, with the latter often subverting the former. I want to offer just one example of how I have been changed in my heart and mind. Before I read this selection, I need to remind you that I may have been one of the first here to offer a land acknowledgement, and I'm probably the last to do it. It seemed important to me at the time to name the original custodians of the land on which our gathering happens, and I researched the various clans of the Lenni Lenape to find out how they suggested we do this. Here's what Musa al-Gharbi said to me in his book. Imagine two incidents of theft. In the first case, a bandit takes something valuable from someone else. Deprived of this important source of wealth, the victim and his family live a life of relative destitution, even as the thief and his family flourish, with nary a thought about the crime that served as the basis for their wealth, nor the fate of those they stole from. Eventually, the perpetrator and his family forget about the theft altogether and come to view their wealth as legitimate. In the second case, a bandit also takes something precious from someone else, likewise leaving the victim and his family in a state of relative destitution, even as the robber and his family prosper. But in the second case, the bandit constantly acknowledges that his own prosperity was achieved at the victim's expense. He explicitly and repeatedly recognizes the state of privation that the victim and his family live in as a result of the crime. He publicly praises the victim at every turn, yet he nonetheless declines to return the stolen resources. Instead, he continues to actively leverage the seized assets in order to build his own wealth, but incessantly laments the poor state of the victim and his family and the horror of the crime that was done to them, and insists that someone really ought to do something to help those people out. The second scenario describes the practice of land acknowledgments, which have grown increasingly popular in symbolic capitalist spaces in recent years, while the first scenario depicts how the people who do make land acknowledgments describe those who don't. I'll leave it to the reader to decide which is worse. And as the evangelicals like to say, I was convicted by that story. So here we are, sisters and brothers of the Unitarian Society of Ridgewood. I can't persuade you, I can't know how to persuade you just how important this book might be for us here at USR or for UUs more generally. I cannot imagine how I could have, in 20 or 25 minutes, explained to you all of the messages for us in this book. I can't summarize the argument of his scholarship. But my hope is that some of us, perhaps many of us, will consider his book, We Have Never Been Woke, and that maybe 5 or 6 of you would commit to reading and discussing the book with me. I imagine a group that includes others from outside USR. I picture some deep and honest discussion happening as a result. And if you're not ready to do that, at least do this. Tomorrow is, after all, Memorial Day. Find some way to do something to honor those who have fallen. Go to a parade, visit a cemetery. If you have nothing else to do tomorrow afternoon, join me in Hawthorne. We'll be marching in a parade that starts at 1:30. Send me an email and I'll tell you where to meet me. I encourage you, act. Don't just talk. So may it be.